Reconsidering the concept of sustainability, personal adaptability dynamics as predictor of positive change. Pavel Lushyn and Sukhenko, University of Educational Management, Department of Psychology and Personal Development, Kiev, Ukraine. Introduction. Currently, we are witnessing the emergence of novel models of the world, as well as the concepts of sustainability integrated into them. The traditional idea of sustainability is challenged by the VUCA model of the world that is volatile, unpredictable, complex, and ambiguous. Further, we will study the perspectives of reconstructing and redefining the concept of sustainability in terms of its personal correlate, that is individual adaptability during the COVID-19 pandemic. Recent theoretical findings revealed the complex impact of COVID-19 pandemic on A, the progress of reaching the goals of sustainable development, and B, on the resource potential, which has turned to be dualistic and ambivalent within social and economic spheres of life. The research has underlined the resourcefulness of the corona crisis for the future policy of social transformation in predicting, assessment, and generating adequate response to the climate change problem. Being aware of the problems caused by the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as understanding the growing complexities consistent with Kondratьev's wave theory, a group of authors formulated an alternative approach to sustainable development in terms of transformative learning program. It produces an adequate change in thinking, formation of new capacities for harmonious administration and management of life problems, which concern nature and building life perspectives. Honesty, obedience, life satisfaction, tolerance for ambiguity, and hope are the most prominent drivers and predictors of personal safety and alleviation of COVID-19 outcomes. Flexibility of psychotherapeutic assistance has considered relevant in increase of subjective well-being. On the emergence of a psychosocial sustainability model, a theoretical substantiation. The sustainability is a phenomenon of economic, social, and psychological self-organization, which also constitute a basic quality of leading open systems. The research is based on the assumption that the ability to psychological and personal change could constitute a precondition for administration of social and even global self-organization. The precondition lies in a reassessment and a reinterpretation of a role of negative, antithetical factors, critical destabilizations, which is the sphere of ecology. During the latest decades, ecology criteria and its understanding has critically changed in psychology. Formerly, a certain state of phenomenon was considered ecologically valid on condition it proved its non-adversarial nature. The latest research of the second wave of the positive psychology supported the idea that a critical and even traumatic event may promise positive results in the course of personal development, which is post-traumatic growth. The task of a psychologist or a clinician is to support or facilitate personal self-organization, which transcends the stages of negative and or even abnormal responses being temporal and thus transient by nature. The purpose of this paper, we assume that the positive personal response to adversity, especially through the dialectical lens of the COVID-19 pandemic evolution, can determine an adequate social response and thus be predictor of systems stabilization. Consequently, the ongoing COVID-19 global crisis may support the paradoxical nature of systems sustainability within the emerging REHI world model, which is R, rhythmical, E, emerging, H, hybrid, and I, innovative. Research goal is to study the perspectives of reconstructing and redefining the concept of sustainability in terms of its personal correlate during COVID-19 pandemic. methodology. In order to verify the hypothesis, we examined the adaptability potential mostly in adults 25-44 years of age. The overwhelming majority of them are master students with their professional experience in the spheres of education, social services, economy, finance, IT, business, medicine, and the military. The study of personal and behavioral changes was carried out by the following reference. Basic coping strategies were analyzed through the study of a coping strategies indicator. Personal readiness for change and different aspects of the uncertainty tolerance was administered with the PCRS, Personal Change Readiness Survey. Meaningfulness of life, meaningful goals were measured with a test of meaningful life orientations. A statistical processing of the data included ANOVA analysis. Data proceeding was administered via SPSS 17 statistical package. Methodology. The research period is ranging from April 2019 till February 2022. During the period, we had 4 assessment sessions. April 2019, the first assessment, we associate with the zero level of impact of the pre-pandemic situation in the world and in Ukraine. It is 8 months before the COVID-19 coronavirus outbreak. 2, April 2020, the second assessment, we associated with a shock level of impact associated with the announcement of the COVID-19 pandemic, the introduction of the first hard lockdown in Ukraine. October 2021, the third assessment, were associated with the expanded or normative level of impact in the context of the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic in Ukraine. And for February 2022, the fourth assessment, were associated with the predictable impact of the pandemic in the context of the spread of a new strain called Omicron. There is a radical increase in the spread of the virus and a relatively mild course of the disease. On the one hand, this period is characterized by the strengthening of quarantine measures. On the other hand, an unprecedented activation of the influence factor of another kind, the threat of Russian military aggression and massive information campaign in the media. Personal development of adults in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, 2019-2022, Personal Change Readiness Survey. Pre-pandemic, first lockdown, adaptive, and hybrid. Personal development of adults in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, meaningful life orientations. Personal development of adults in the context of COVID-19 pandemic, basic coping strategies. Results of the research. During the excessive spread of the pandemic and the first lockdown in Ukraine, people responded with psychological closure. According to the posterior comparison between the first and the second assessment, there was a decrease in their overall readiness for change, including optimism and tolerance for ambiguity. This means that people's hope and faith in success haven't been noticeably shaken. Noticeably shaken. It has become more difficult for them to be balanced about the lack of clear answers. Between the second and the third diagnostic assessment, April 2020, October 2021, Ukrainians experienced 2 waves of the pandemic. During the period, they largely developed individual and herd immunity to new strains of coronavirus and both biological and psychological levels, and practically return to a sustainable way and rhythm of a novel lifestyle. Over the year and a half, they have gained the unique and paradoxical experience of living in conditions of isolation, self-isolation, pressure, threats, and losses nobody could have imagined in pre-pandemic years. There arises a question: How did all this affected the psychological portrait of Ukrainians, and in what psychological state did they enter the third wave of the pandemic? Being in difficult conditions, people managed not only to adapt to them, but also to increase their own psychological and personal capital. Compared to 2019, in 2021, they became more inventive. Thus, the October 2021 pandemic situation seems more stable and predictable, especially on psychological level of young adults in Ukraine. However, in February 2022, on the background of the fourth and almost normative wave of the pandemic, Ukraine faces a powerful military threat from a neighbor country. Significant psychological markers of hybrid pandemic military challenges at this time were the lowest for the entire study. Indicator of tolerance to ambiguity ranges is the following. Conclusions. Theoretical analysis of the problem has shown that the studies of the pandemic period are extremely fragmentary in describing the negative and positive aspects of its influence, predictors and factors that determine the stability of social and economic system. In this regard, we have attempted to reveal a general picture of their relationship and dynamics over time in the context of the COVID-19 pandemic. Second, we have put forward the hypothesis that the self-organization of systems and the personal level is inextricably linked with the level of social self-organization and exerts a certain influence on the signs of stability of the latter. Hence, it seems logical to consider personal self-organization and stabilization as a predictor of the sustainability of social system. Having conducted a special study of the influence of pandemic on the properties of personality adaptation, we have established a stable, or more precisely, rhythmical nature of the stabilization of the personal system. Moreover, we have found that the diverse phenomenology of personality manifestations in diversity, COVID-19 pandemic, fits into the and corresponds to the dialectical sustainability model of development: thesis, antithesis, synthesis. And four, this can also support the emergence of an original understanding of the world in terms of a rhythmical, emerging, hybrid, and innovative self-organization, world. While the concept of sustainability being facilitation of the rhythmical change of self-organization in any open living system, such as social and psychological by nature.